ESPN 1320.
James Ham there, Kyle Madsen here, and Chris Biderman of the Sacramento Bee live from Salt Lake City, getting ready to head to Atlanta, following the Kings around like a weirdo. Appreciate you jumping on, Chris. Nice little win for the Kings last night. For me, the big takeaway is not that they're better than the Jazz or that they're better than Portland, but that it felt like either of those games are games they could have lost last year. And neither game was really in doubt. They kind of went in and dominated two games they should have dominated. And to me, that shows a little bit of a shift in mindset for this year's team. Is that your takeaway, or are you chalking this up as early season bad teams?
Yeah, I mean, Portland and Utah are both seem like teams that are squarely in the Cooper flag race. So, but I do think it's a fair point to make that we have seen the Kings over the last couple of years play down to their competition, and those games would either be a lot closer than they should be, or the Kings would even lose a couple of those games. But last night, I just think overall, and last night's included in this, just DeMar DeRozan adds a level of stability that he's not really going to let them have those type of letdowns, because even if the rest of the guys are struggling and there's an off night from three, collectively, you can dump the ball to DeMar and he can get you a good look, or he could get to the free throw line, or he could even play make for somebody else. He had 8 assists last night. And a point that Mike Brown made before the game is that, Domantas Sabonis assists might be down this year overall because DeMar DeRozan is going to command the ball a lot more than anybody else since Mike Brown has been here. So that creates opportunities for the Kings, I think, to have a little bit more variability in their offense. They don't always have to be the up-tempo, fast-paced, high-volume three-point shooting team. When that's not working, they can go to a different club in their bag and dump it down to DeMar DeRozan, or let him go one-on-one or play make for somebody else. So and that's something that Will Hardy, Jazz coach, talked about before the game. He coached DeMar DeRozan in San Antonio as an assistant on Greg Popovich's staff, and he mentioned, like, when he first found out DeMar DeRozan was going to the Kings, his thought was, oh no, now they're going to be able to switch up their offense and not just be that up-tempo, high-volume three-point shooting team, which, when you shoot a lot of threes, there's a lot of variability in that too. If you have an off night, you can lose to anybody. And so what DeMar DeRozan adds is somebody who's going to consistently get you, 18 to 30 points and could provide that stability that insulates you from some of that variation you can have with your three-point shooting.
Yeah, Chris, I kind of noticed you hate to say it's a good thing to lose a game, right? But I think the way that they lost to the Lakers kind of shined a light on this fact that when things go south, you need to feed DeMar DeRozan he needs to get to the line. He needs to take control in those situations, as sort of like, especially when he was on the court, like the senior guy on the court. And I kind of feel like we saw the game against Portland start off very clunky, very weird. And DeMar, it clicked in his head, like, okay, I need to get to the line. I need to figure out whatever it is and get us moving the right way. And it seemed like that helped pull the team out of the funk. And I think that maybe that Lakers game, where they did lose a game that they probably shouldn't have, but I think it may have opened up the room for DeMar to feel like it's his place to do what we're asking him to do at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's going to take time, right? Like, it's been, it was obviously clunky in the opener against Minnesota. And, everybody on the Kings is fully aware of the fact that it's going to take time to incorporate DeMar DeRozan into the offense because of just the contrasting style that he plays with. That being said, like, the Kings have, I think they're 6th offensively through 4 games, and they're at, 115.6 points per 100 possessions, something like that. So even though it's still not where they want to be, it's been pretty successful. That said, their last, they've only played 4 games, and 2 of them have come against teams that we presume to potentially be tanking for Cooper flag. So I do think it's trending in the right direction. I think Mike Brown's talked about how, not having Kevin Huerter throughout training camp kind of threw a wrench into things, and there's still an adjustment for Huerter playing off of DeMar DeRozan and Trey Lyles to a lesser extent. So this is going to be a work in progress. But I think even that being said, like, they're off to a promising start, and they're doing things that would indicate that this could be a more difficult team to play in the playoffs than it was previously, because they do have a guy who can score in different ways in DeMar DeRozan. I think that's all by design. That's why they got him.
Chris Biderman of the Sacramento Bee joining us now, also host of the famed Candlestick Chronicles podcast on the Blue Wire Podcast Network. That's I've heard that. Domantas Sabonis this season, and we can talk about DeMar DeRozan and Keon Ellis having a great game last night, and Kevin Huerter looking like he's getting back to form. But Domantas Sabonis through the first 4 games, averaging 24.3 points a night, 11 boards, 5.5 assists. Is how much of an impact has his uptick in scoring? How much impact do you think it's had, and how much impact can it have on this team moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's pretty substantial, because one thing, when obviously the Warriors series a couple years ago, it was their game plan was play off him, basically play in the restricted area, let him shoot anything further away than that. And the Kings didn't really have a counter. And now you do have that counter, right? You do have DeMar DeRozan, and you actually have somebody who's better at setting up Domantas Sabonis than the other guys have been. While you're also taking some playmaking off of his plate. And I think overall it just makes for a healthier diet of offense and shots for Sabonis, instead of relying so heavily on him. I think, what was he, second or third in the entire NBA in terms of how much he had the ball last year. And obviously he was good in that role and DHOs and those types of things. But now he is a good finisher around the basket. And so now you can optimize him in those ways a little bit more with DeMar DeRozan's playmaking. So I think that's a net positive for sure. But the counterpoint to that is his assists are going to be down. Like, his assist numbers, I think, are just going to be down throughout the season, because DeMar DeRozan is going to have the ball in his hands a lot, to Mike Brown's point. So yeah, I think one of the things that you're getting with DeMar DeRozan is potentially a more maximized version of Domantas Sabonis from a scoring perspective, because you rely less on him to facilitate for everybody else.
Yep.
And I think that's ultimately a long-term positive for the Kings.
Yeah, I think it is a long-term positive. Chris Biderman from Sacramento Bee joining us here on the Insiders. Chris, we saw Keon Ellis come in, and he's worked his way back into the rotation. But watching him last night, the energy, the effort, the stat line is wild. 5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 3 blocks. Like, that's the glue guy this team needs. Did you see a little more bounce in his step last night? And how do you think they're going to figure this whole thing out with him in and out of the rotation, or do you think he's earned his way back into Mike Brown's good graces?
Yeah, it sounds like Mike Brown is pretty comfortable with 9 in the rotation, and obviously Keon is part of that 9. The 4 coming off the bench, and Alex Len, Trey Lyles, Malik Monk, and Keon. I think there's the Kings are still working a lot of stuff out, frankly, right? Like, it seems like Mike Brown has a pretty young assistant coaching staff. Like, losing Jordi Fernandez, I think, is no small thing for them, because of how much responsibility he had during games. And I think, Jordi's was the defensive coordinator. Luke Locks is in that position now, and Luke's never done that before. He hasn't been a defensive specialist assistant coach before. But one of the other things that Jordi Fernandez did was, when Mike Brown was wrapped up in the game and, coaching the game, sometimes he would lose track of their substitution patterns, their planned substitution patterns. And that's one thing that Jordi Fernandez would take care of. And, I think there's been some clunky substitution patterns. I think in the season opener, when you had all those guys play 40 plus minutes, I think that was a function of Mike Brown being wrapped up in the game and the assistants not necessarily doing what Jordy did, which was just sub guys automatically when Brown was busy doing other things. So I think there's a transition period going on there. And I think Keon might have been, that might have been part of the issue with Keon. And also it was a Kevin Huerter. Like Kevin Huerter, the Kings view Kevin Huerter's spacing is integral to what they want to do. And Mike Brown said that he thinks Kevin Huerter's playing well on both sides of the ball right now, and that they need him to, right now be that starting shooting guard. And that's kind of put Keon Ellis in sort of a weird spot to start the season. But now, to your point, James, I think Keon's settling into that role, coming in with Malik Monk, in the back half of the first quarter, being that sort of super sub combo guard and providing perimeter defense. I think that is ultimately a really good niche for him. And, we've seen it before. Like if Kevin Huerter struggles down the road, then maybe Keon will get back into the starting lineup. But for now, I do think Mike Brown is pretty settled on his 9-man rotation. And I think as things get moving forward, the Kings coaching staff is going to be better at handling those substitution patterns while they get used to Jordy Fernandez no longer being there.
Chris Biderman covers the Sacramento Kings for the Sacramento Bee, live from Salt Lake City right now. I know you got to run and catch a flight here in a bit, but I guess, James, we haven't really gotten to talk about this. So if you would like to also answer this question, feel free. But Chris, we'll start with you. Do you think that Trey Lyles at the 5 is just going to be the thing we see moving forward, or was that a specific matchup thing with the Jazz, or will we start seeing him be the 5 in this kind of 9-man rotation?
I'd have to go back and look, but I think it was kind of specific to the Jazz matchup because the Jazz had first spells in the game John Collins playing the 5, and he's pretty small for a 5. So I think that's what the Kings were doing. They just wanted Trey Lyles' mobility out there to match up with Collins. But I mean, you guys remember like a couple years ago when they went to Minnesota and they had that overtime win in Minnesota. A big part of it, Domantas Sabonis fouled out. Trey Lyles played small ball center against Rudy Gobert, and he spread the floor, he rebounded well, he used his physicality. I think that's something, while Trey Lyles gets further removed from his injury and gets back into a rhythm, using him as sort of a small ball 5 to stave off or be a matchup issue for bigger, slower centers. I think that's something that can always be in the Kings' bag. Because they can play 5 out with 5 shooters, and that can be. I think you need to be able to do that at some level and not lose too much defensively to win in the NBA. Particularly, you look at what the Celtics are doing. You look at why the Knicks traded for Cat. Everybody wants to play 5 out now, so I think the ability to do that is going to be important for the Kings at some point. But I think last night it was more specific to the Jazz just because John Collins was playing small ball 5 for them.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. Yeah, the small ball 5 is something that is integral to like good basketball teams at this point in the NBA. And if the Kings are going to take a big step, there are going to be nights where Alex Len doesn't play. And Alex Len is a trooper. He understands what's going on, and he's more than willing to accept that some nights he won't play. Last night he played 5 minutes all in at the end of the game. I do think we're going to see more and more of it, but I also feel like Mike, at this point, his job was first to get Kevin Huerter going. Now it's to try to find ways to get Trey Lyles going. And sometimes that means giving him an opportunity to play against bigger guys that he can go out and drag those guys outside and really, find his own game. And so it's a process to get these guys back on the court. Missing 5 or 6 weeks leading up to the start of the season isn't ideal for anyone. Missing 7 months leading up to the season isn't ideal, but we're seeing Mike having to figure out ways to get these guys on the court and in game shape on the fly. And in order for this team to be optimized, Kevin Huerter has to be great and Trey Lyles has to be really, really good. And the only way to force these guys out there is, again, you just look, they just played 4 games in 6 nights. You got to get them on the court in game action because there is no practice time.
Yeah, for sure. Chris Biderman, Sacramento Bee. We got a couple more for you here. My thing with the Kings, I said 51-31 before the season. Nothing has happened through the first 4 games that have moved me off of that. Has anything happened through these 4 games that have made you feel better or worse about the Kings than you thought coming in?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. I mean, maybe I do feel a little bit better about the way that they're relying more on DeMar DeRozan to either get buckets and change up the pace of the offense versus I think the Kings were probably over reliant on Domantas Sabonis the last couple of years offensively. And I think that was a big reason why their season stalled out in the playoffs and in the play-in tournament the last 2 years. I think teams just figured out ways to defend it. And I think the Kings are just frankly a whole lot more difficult to defend now. So I'm expecting as the season goes on for that to look better and better, barring injury, of course. But I think what DeMar DeRozan does complements what the rest of the guys do. And I know, it's not necessarily a super easy fit because he's not, the high flying, fast paced guy that we associate with the Kings typically. But I think it's a good counterbalance. It's good, it's good to have another club in the bag. Like I said, like whatever sports metaphor you want to use, like a changeup or an off-speed pitch, right?
You are a golf guy, so
I try to be. But yeah, so I think that's positive. And I think when you can incorporate DeMar DeRozan to a point where it's taking less off Domantas Sabonis's plate, like I said, I think that's a positive.
Chris, you're on the road with the team. How much do you think they needed this early season road trip to get away? It's 8 days, but like teams bond. They go to the movies, they go to dinner, they have little planned events when they're on the road. And it does feel like, you're at home for so long, you're trying to work together here. And sometimes you do need to get away from family and you need to get away from real life in order to sort of find your balance as a group. Do you think this is a good thing?
Yeah, I know they went to dinner last night. They, obviously a couple days between games. I think they're probably in the air right now on the way to Atlanta. But yeah, as far as I know, everyone in the traveling party went out to dinner last night in Salt Lake to an Italian place. And yeah, camaraderie is good. I mean, I think, I've asked around a little bit about incorporating DeMar, and everyone's like, he's like easy. He's the most non-difficult addition any team can make because he's been on so many teams. He's seen so much in the league. He's so constant. He's just steady, right? Everything you hear about DeMar DeRozan is some synonym for steadiness. So I think all that helps. But this is also a group, even aside from DeMar, there aren't a ton of new faces in terms of the core. Like the rotation has pretty much been intact here for a while now. So yeah, they needed the road trip. I think maybe more important than the road trip is just kind of the schedule. Like to get Portland and Utah to get your first 2 wins, for that to be your first back-to-back, I think is, beneficial for the Kings. Atlanta has struggled out the gate and they're banged up. They play tonight, so the Kings will have a little bit of a rest advantage against the Hawks when they play on Friday. Toronto's not great, obviously, and then Miami will be a tough game on Monday. But I think even more so than the timing of the trip, I think it's the opponents of the trip because the Kings have an opportunity to get some wins under their belt before they return home.
Chris Biderman covering the Kings for the Sacramento Bee, doing a great job. 60 seconds here. If the 49ers make one trade, I got to ask you a Niners question. You host the world's finest 49ers podcast, Candlestick Chronicles. If they make one trade, what position should they address?
I would say defensive line. And I know a lot of people would say edge, and I wouldn't have any problem with edge. But if you can get somebody who could play both interior and the outside, I think that would be super beneficial. The Jaguars stink, and they're selling off some players. Why not bring back Eric Armstead? Like, I think it would. I think, yeah, Sacramento legend, obviously, but somebody who can play outside and inside, be obviously a really good run defender for them, which they need, and provide a boost to the pass rush. I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't know if that bridge has been burned because of, what happened in the offseason and the 49ers wanting him to take a pay cut and then releasing him and all that. But I mean, he's exactly what they need. So that's a type of player I would go get.
He's Chris Biderman. You can read him at sacb.com. Doing a great job covering the Kings for this entire road trip. Appreciate your time, man. Go catch a flight and fly safe.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
See you, Chris. There he goes. Chris Biderman, Sacramento Bee, Candlestick Chronicles podcast. Shout out.
It's a good podcast.
Really.